episode in the Belong series hosted by Square Circle. I am so excited for our conversation today because I get to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Ilana Shapiro Yahdav. She's not only a Square Circle coach, she's also an advanced certified grief recovery specialist and founder of the Nonlinear Journey. Ilana, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me here today. Really happy to be here.
Well, the type of work that you do is more relevant now than ever. When employees are facing things like uncertainties around COVID, maybe they've experienced personal loss due to the pandemic. There are social justice movements. There's a lot of things happening out in the world that are really calling a lot of our energy these days. And some people might not even realize that grief is more present than ever in their personal lives. Based on conversations that you and I have had before, I know that grief can look a lot of different ways, and it can take the form of a lot of different things. So in your words, can you share with the audience, bare bones, what is grief and what can it look like when someone is grieving? Because I think we look at it maybe in terms of the traditional sense of a loss of a loved one. And there's sadness and there's maybe having bad days, but it can also show up in terms of depression and anxiety. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So just let's all get on the basics of the definition of what grief is. And grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. So again, it's the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. And grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And the Grief Recovery Institute, that's how they define it. And that's a term that I use as well. And so when you look at the definition of grief like that, you realize that it's not only around death. There are over 40 different types of loss that we can experience. And especially in the context of COVID right now, there's loss of job safety, there's loss of normalcy, there's loss of just being a regular routine, going to your grocery store and gym, things that I think, we get used to doing in our routine are now something that is hard to do. And then children and childcare for those working parents. And then you add the layers of what's going on and the racism in this country and the politics in this country. So there's a lot of layers. And on top of that, you have the deaths caused by COVID, and you have the deaths during COVID that are not caused by COVID. So we can go on and on about all of the different kinds of losses that we're experiencing in this season. And there are a lot, and especially in the workplace as well, because there's that routine of going to work and seeing your work friends and your work peers. And so interactions have completely changed and completely shifted the way we do things. And so when you look at it with that context, there's really a lot of different layers of grief that we have. And so it's important to know that. And I think a lot of people don't always realize that we can grieve our routine. We can grieve, I miss Orange Theory. We can grieve all kinds of things, and what might seem small, but they're not small. If it affects you, then it's important and valid. So, and this is a topic I could talk about for hours, but for the sake of time, I want to leave it there. And then to your question of what does grief look like? Grief looks different on everyone, pretty much. And, grief is something that sometimes we can fall into that comparison trap. And it's really, really, really important to never compare our grief to someone else's grief. So your grief is valid and someone else's grief is valid, and it doesn't take away from yours and vice versa. And how grief can look in the workplace in particular is missed deadlines, accidents, absenteeism and presenteeism, impaired ability to concentrate or focus, distraction. So it can kind of also look like someone's sort of slacking off, but really it's just when someone's in grief, it takes so much energy to be able to focus and to process. And, grief brain is a thing, not being able to really remember things and retain things. So it's really important, especially in the context of the workplace, if you see someone struggling like that, it's good to just say, hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Before assuming that any disciplinary actions need to be taken or that they're slacking off, especially in this season. It's even more important to check in and see what's going on with people.
And I imagine that there's probably a lot of organizations who don't know how to support grieving employees. Either they don't know how to recognize the grieving process, or they don't know how to reach out and offer support so that, those things like absenteeism, missed deadlines, et cetera, that those are mitigated, so that work can still move forward, but in a way that is compassionate to the personal experience of the employee. So what would you recommend in terms of the organizations stepping in and supporting their employees?
So grief, for some reason, is very taboo to talk about, and people seem very nervous to talk about it, but addressing it can really do wonders. So like I said, with, if a manager sees that an employee is slacking off, then to have a frank conversation of just from a place of compassion. Are you doing okay? How is the season for you? Is your family okay? And asking compassionate questions is a huge thing, and just not jumping to any conclusions at all. And it's important for organizations to realize that, not working from home is not easy for everyone, for a variety of reasons, from bad situations at home to just loneliness. And so to be able to check in and to not be afraid of difficult conversations and to not be afraid of tears or strong emotions. And I know sometimes people really like to keep the work space separate from the personal, but people are people, and grief is not something that will just stay home, as much as we'd all would love that to be. Grief comes with you. So it's important for organizations to also have that space, to have good bereavement policies, to have good bereavement resources, if not in-house, to have, people like me, people like my partner Kim, who do this work, and to know where to refer people to, and not to assume that they know what the company resources are. But also there's little things that coworkers and managers can do, like checking in, saying, hey, let's go for a walk right now, or just being sensitive if someone comes back from a loss, and just being sensitive to that and say, checking in on their workload. If there's any way to help offset workload as they ease back in, that's a huge, huge help. So there's a lot of little things that you can do, but actually really are a big thing. Remembering anniversaries, and just being like, I know today's an anniversary, just want to see if you want to talk about it, or, like, here's a candy bar. I just want you to know, like, I'm thinking of you, just so the person can feel seen and validated. That's a lot of what it is acknowledging the pain. It does so much. It doesn't cost anyone anything, and it just has such incredible benefits.
So it sounds like these conversations and simple gestures can really go a long way. So they don't have to be, here's a program that you need to walk through that I'm going to put you. It can be small things that make a big difference. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh yeah, yes. And it's helping a person feel seen and not alone. And not alone, or if they want to be alone, having that space. A lot of the offices are open concepts, and so there's nowhere to really, go. And so, having a space for someone to go if, you need to cry or need to have a few minutes alone is also really beneficial for someone. So yeah, it really is a small, or like having buddy systems, another coworker to just check in and say, hey, how's it going this week? I see you. I hear you. I'm here if you want to talk.
Yeah, I can see how that would provide such a relief to the individual, saying, this isn't something that is inappropriate to bring to work, because then that might add additional pressure to the person who's grieving. And speaking of the employee, him or herself, what would you suggest to them if they're the person going through the grieving process? what would you suggest to them in terms of how they mitigate this process while working?
That's a really hard one because, when grieving, it's really hard. Everything takes so much energy. But what I think is really, really important for grievers to know is that it's normal and natural to feel exhausted, stressed, overwhelmed, that everything feels difficult, and to give yourself that love and grace and space. And if possible, to have a frank conversation with a manager and ask maybe for some extended deadlines, or, see if a coworker can help, just pick up some of the work and just let management know what's going on. Because a lot of times management has no idea what's going on. And so the hope is that management would be, understanding to that. And I know they're not always that case, and people can sometimes be worried about telling their managers about what's going on with them. But if they can talk to coworkers and make sure they get the support that they need outside of the office, and not be afraid to take time off if they can. I know that's also not always possible for people to take time off, but to really go easy on themselves and know that it won't be this hard forever, and that there are, tools, there is support, but just to really go easy on oneself. If you need to run to the bathroom to cry, that's okay. When I went back to work first after my dad died, I can't even tell you how much time I spent in the bathroom crying, because I needed a private space to cry. And
yeah, and knowing that you have a team or a manager or someone at work who can be a safe space to confide in. It sounds like, using some of these tools that you've presented today, that could really be such a comfort, even if it's not about fixing anything. So I think a lot of people, when they see discomfort in someone else, they have an urge to fix. But knowing that, small gestures or lending an ear or just saying, "Hey, I see you," can really provide a space for that person to go through their process while still contributing.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because while there are a lot of things we should do, there's a bunch of things that we absolutely should not do. And fixing is actually number one on my list of things that you should not do. Because when someone is grieving, there's nothing to fix. I mean, their heart is broken. They need to be heard and seen. And it's the same with analysis, critique. A lot of us as humans, we want to fix things. But when someone's grieving, don't need analysis, don't need critiques, don't need comparisons, don't need, when this happened to me. Or if you want to talk about your own experience, you can say, I remember when I was grieving, this is how I felt. Does this resonate with you? And so it's really, really, and I'm really glad you brought that up. It's really important to not try to fix, critique, because that's not going to help the situation. In fact, that's going to isolate the griever even more. And it's also really, really, really important to never say, I know how you feel, or at least. Just don't start a sentence with at least. It's just don't. Or I know how you feel, or there are plenty of fish in the sea. And, some of these, like, I say it like a little flippantly, but like people actually say these things. Or, you can have more children. Or, he lived a long, good life. And these are very hurtful. And while some of them intellectually are true, they're just completely emotionally barren. Now they're completely unhelpful and even just make someone feel even more alienated. So just as important as, what to do, there's what not to do, but not saying anything at all is also not good. Like not even addressing it at all. And what I say is, if you really don't know what to say, just say that. Say, I don't know what to say. I want to say something. I just want you to know, like, my heart, I'm here for you. And boom. There's nothing fancy, and that's being honest, that's addressing it, and that gives the griever, either they can say, thank you, I don't want to talk about it, or thank you, and maybe want to share what's coming up for them.
Amazing. Because some of those things that we may have received or heard, would have been very well intentioned, right? Some of those most hurtful things are not intending to compare or to lessen or to isolate the individual, but that's what they end up doing, no matter how well intentioned the sentiment was. I'm really glad that you brought some of those phrases to light, because they're probably, some quick go-tos that people who don't know what to say just reach for and end up doing more damage than good.
Oh, the other one that's very common that I have to bring up is don't feel bad. That's another one. Don't ever tell someone not to feel bad. And just if I can share one more tip and tool that's really helpful is there's a line between asking questions to help the griever share, and there's also a line of curiosity, right? If you're asking a question for your own curiosity, no. But if you see that the person wants to share and needs a little coaxing, you can say, what happened? Tell me more. But you have to make sure it's coming from that place of compassion, that place of love. And what we like to say is just to picture a heart with ears. So if you picture a heart with ears and you think about that, and that's how you show up, I know it's a little bit cutesy, but if you just really come from that compassionate place, and then you really can't go wrong. Because if you're coming from that place of being a heart with ears, then you're going to show up for that person.
Oh, amazing. I love that visual. So I can see that being really useful for teammates, for colleagues, for their individuals. And I know, in the work that you do, you have a lot of strategies and a lot of tools that folks could use. So is there maybe like a success story or a tactical takeaway that could provide a strategy that listeners could employ right now to do a better job of managing their employees' grief? Because we are, now that listeners can kind of better understand and recognize the telltale signs of grief that others might be experiencing, or they might even not until now have known that they are themselves experiencing, what can employers do now to reach out and support one another?
One of the biggest things is to be aware of their own emotions too. One of the biggest things is putting your own life mask on first.
Yeah.
And because if a manager or management has too many emotions, then it kind of can get caught up in decisions, and also can have a negative adverse effect because they may not be able to have the capacity or the patience for others because they have their own difficulties. So that's a really big one, is to understand and process their emotions, but also to have conversations, to have dialogue, to have, if numbers are not being met, to have conversations from places of compassion, not from places of you missed your quota, you're fired, or you're on a PIP, you're on a personal improvement plan. But to have human conversations are two, I know that the putting your own mask on first is not the easiest thing. So something that's very easy is to have conversations, is you see someone struggling, to have conversations, and that doesn't cost anything. And it's also important to not assume that employees know what resources are available. So a lot of companies do have resources and employees don't know about them. So just important to say, we have these resources available. Here's a list of providers, of programs that we offer, and, maybe you can take advantage of those. So those are ones that are, I think, very easy and don't cost anything, that can be done today. And again, I can't stress enough, it's a lot in the little things, that's a great place to start. And then in actually getting support, like going through the grief recovery method, getting bereavement counseling, getting grief coaching and support. Those are all things, but that's not, that onus is not on the company to do in-house. Like, to help provide that or steer towards resources is important. But, I don't expect, managers to get trained in grief recovery and take that on, of course, although that'd be great if they did. But yeah, so I think really just something to take away right now is to build that awareness around your own emotions, because awareness is huge. And when you have that awareness, you can also see how you show up to others,
Mm-hmm.
and to just try to have more open conversations about what's coming up for people, because sometimes it's all it takes for people to be validated and seen and heard, which is so important, and
Yeah.
feel like they belong. Because one of the big things when you're grieving is it kind of feel like your entire world has been pulled out from under you and that you don't belong anywhere. And so being able to belong in your workplace where you spend so much time can be very helpful and healing.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Ilana. I think these tools are accessible, they're implementable, they're easy to do, and they're just so relevant, I think, to today's climate. And I just wanted to thank you for sharing your expertise with our listeners today. I hope that that everyone has taken something away from this that they can either use to help themselves, their colleagues, or their teams. And I have no doubt that this will offer some comfort to someone who might be in a tough situation at this point. So thank you so much, Ilana, for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.